Hi, my name is Jason O'Neill, and welcome to Hoops Factory. Today we have a special guest, Edwin Henderson. Edwin is the grandson of Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame member Edwin Bancroft Henderson. Edwin Bancroft Henderson is known as the grandfather of black basketball, but his story is not widely known. Our guest today has a book coming out on Amazon that is already available for pre-order entitled The Grandfather of Black Basketball, The Life and Times of Dr. E.B. Henderson. And you can find a link to the book down in the description on YouTube. So, Edwin Henderson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, yeah, we wanted to talk to you about your grandfather, the grandfather of black basketball. Not as widely known about the contributions that Edwin Bancroft Henderson had to the game of basketball. For instance, he passed away in 1977. How old were you at the time, and what were you able to have? Were you able to have a personal relationship with your grandfather, or is it more from stories that you've heard over the years?
I had a very close relationship with my grandfather. I was somewhat the apple of his eye. I was his namesake. Um, when I was younger, I was always, when you see pictures of us, I was always sitting on his knee. In 1977, when he passed, I was 21 years old. And I was actually at a radio station doing a commercial. And something just came in my mind and said, you need to go see your grandfather. And my grandfather had been in the hospital for 3 weeks. And when I got there, shortly after I got there, he took his last breath and died. And so I was tasked with, calling the rest of the family to come. My grandfather died, and that we needed to come to the hospital.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I think I've always had this connection with him. Um, and right now, like I'm actually have preserved his home in Falls Church, Virginia. I'm working very hard at preserving his legacy as well, and creating the narrative which we now see today, which is about basketball, whereas before we probably thought more of him, and he actually said himself, I'm going to be remembered for anything in my life, it'll probably be for writing The Negro in Sports, which was the first scholarly book on African American participation in athletics. Now, before that, he also wrote the first Spalding handbook that had pictures of African American athletes and teams, and that was in between 1910 and 1913, under the auspices of his league, which he started, the Interscholastic Athletic Association, which was the first African American athletic league. And he started that because the AAU would not allow black teams to compete. And they actually encouraged him. James Sullivan was the president of the AAU, and he was also the person that he wrote to in order to write the Spalding handbooks. So they knew each other. And part of that was because he met all of these people because of his Harvard connection, going to Harvard to earn his certification to teach physical education. And he was the first African American to be African American male, should I say, certified to teach physical education in the United States. And through that, he very aggressively put in place the infrastructure for African Americans to participate in organized sports.
And at the time, there really wasn't that avenue available for African Americans in the U.S. I was looking up, and not only were professional sports, but also kind of youth sports, obviously
Mm-hmm.
whites only. You mentioned kind of the book, the Spalding book. What were the first stories that you heard about your grandfather? Were they basketball related? I also know that he had a quite extensive education background. What were the first things that
Yeah,
you remember hearing? Was it all about kind of the sports, or did they talk to you about kind of the importance of education early on as well?
you know, it was. We never talked really much about sports. We appreciated sports. He came to my sporting events that I was an athlete and participating in. He drove quite a distance in order to see some of those. But it was just life lessons, and things about history and African American history and culture, that but also living a clean, healthy lifestyle, because we bonded through our summers at Highland Beach, Maryland, where fishing and boating and crabbing and all of those things were the things that we spent a lot of time doing together. And so it was, to me, he was just grandpa. Now, I do remember watching the 1969 NBA Finals with him when Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell were battling out on the court, Lakers against Celtics. But for the most part, we were, he was just my grandfather. Some people will say that I should have said that he's the father of Black basketball, but there are two other gentlemen who have been assigned that moniker. One being Bob Douglas, who was the organizer and the manager for the New York Rens. And he was the father of professional Black basketball. And then there was John McLendon, who was the father of collegiate basketball. My grandfather dealt on the organizational level a lot more than he did on the actual participating in athletic level. He's the one that put things in place. But he also, after a few years of starting his league and starting this championship between the teams of his league and the teams of the New York League, he strapped on his tennis shoes and organized a team in Washington. The Washington 12th Street is under the auspices of the 12th Street YMCA. And he was known as the best center in the game. Oh, wow. And this is according to Doherty of the New York World. And he was only 5'10". But back then the game was different too, because back then the center was the person that distributed the ball. Okay, he's the one that basically controlled it, much like the point guard does today. But after each point, there was a jump ball at center court. After each basket, the game has evolved into what you see today. It didn't start out like this. And just like when Wilt Chamberlain came into the league, they broadened the lane. They made it so that you could not goaltend, and other things, because the game had to evolve. And then they changed the jump ball rule either in the 30s or 40s. So what we see today, I mean, there was no three-point line. So you have to understand that the game that started with James Naismith is not the game we see today.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I was actually looking up it. So I did see that kind of the influence on the New York Rens, and that Dr. Henderson did predate the New York Rens, and they're still around today. I cover AAU basketball, and we still see the New York Rens with some pretty good players around today. I was looking at just what were popular sports around kind of the turn of the century, especially in New York, and it seemed like basketball and car racing were especially popular amongst the whites. I guess my question to you is, if there hadn't been this kind of attention that was brought by your grandfather around the turn of the century, do you think African Americans would have been naturally drawn to basketball, or could we end up with a bunch of people liking car racing now if it weren't for your grandfather?
My grandfather believed that basketball was innately adapted to the athletic abilities of African Americans, and as all sports were. But he said that the issue basically And he said this in a quote in a Crisis Magazine article in 1911, that given the same training and facilities that the white athletes would find their black counterparts as equal or superior in every endeavor, every athletic endeavor. And I dare say that that's true in everything. If you give us African Americans the same training and the same facilities, we'll be on an equal level with everyone else. And he said that, and that was in 1911. Okay, so that was a very bold statement.
I also had a question. So I saw an article that was actually in the New York Times. In 1974, Dr. Henderson was inducted to what they were calling the Black Athletes Hall of Fame, along with some of the greatest athletes of all time: Jim Brown, Bill Russell, Joe Louis, Jackie Robinson, all of them. But I couldn't figure out if he actually was able to attend. The article I read didn't say whether he attended. Do you know if he was able to attend that there was like a luncheon associated with it, and how he was received if he was able to attend?
He definitely attended. And there were a lot that did not attend. I mean, there were quite a number, there were some that did not attend. He did attend. And the thing that people have to understand is that even though he is not known today, when he was alive, he was held in very high esteem on all levels, including the Basketball Hall of Fame, which I have letters that they wrote to him that I found in a box in the attic of his house when I moved into it, and someone had thrown his file cabinet into a box and placed it in the attic. I was blessed and lucky to have found that, because in that I have that was the roadmap. That was the roadmap to tell his story. And so, this whole thing that has happened here, it's happened over a 30-year period. It's not like, like it happened, poof, all of a sudden, everybody knows who E.V. Henderson is. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes persistence. And I hope that I have, in some way, been diligent in all of that.
Yeah, no, I actually was, when I first heard the story of your grandfather, was surprised that it wasn't more widely known and that it just wasn't something that kind of everybody knew about. In 2013, the then Harvard basketball coach Tommy Amaker began to schedule matchups between Howard University, which was Dr. Henderson's alma mater, and Harvard. He stated the purpose of the game was to celebrate the school's connection and shared tradition of excellence. But Amaker's connection actually ran a little bit deeper. He grew up in Falls Church and his mother was actually once a student of Mary Ellen Henderson. Do you know of any other stories where that connection exists and it really is kind of Dr. Henderson's influence that has created something kind of in the modern day that we just aren't able to equate? Because I saw that and I was like, no, that's because of Dr. Henderson. That's not just a random Howard versus Harvard game.
I really can't. I ran into Tommy Amaker a couple of months ago, and I'll be seeing him next month because I was invited up to Harvard for a forum called the Breakfast Club. Not the one with Charlemagne the God, even though I'd love to participate on that one as well. But this is a group of more intellectual Harvard people, and also it's the honored guest speaker will be Adam Silver. So I'm hoping to have a minute with him.
Sure, absolutely.
And to, share, the information and the book that I've just written as well, which is now available on Amazon, entitled The Grandfather of Black Basketball, The Life and Times of Dr. E.V. Henderson.
Yeah, absolutely. On YouTube, we'll make sure that we put a link down in the description so everybody can go ahead and click on the link in the description for pre-order. Absolutely. Yeah, no, hopefully the NBA can find some way to acknowledge. I think that's the biggest thing, is an acknowledgement of the contribution. Like I said, I was surprised that it's not more widely known, kind of, his contribution.
Well, the Washington Wizards have acknowledged him in several ways. They have a couple of awards, which they give out in my grandfather's honor every year, but also Monumental Sports and the owner, Ted Leonsis, donated money towards a statue of my grandfather at his alma mater, his first alma mater, which was Minor Teachers College, which is now the University of District of Columbia, which is in Washington on Connecticut Avenue. So now there is a statue of my grandfather, and we always talked about having a statue of him ever since, the induction into the Basketball Hall of Fame. But the Hall of Fame doesn't offer any money to do that.
Sure.
But the sculptor who does all of the statues for the Basketball Hall of Fame also did this one for my grandfather, E.B. Henderson.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, great.
It's very nice, and I'm very happy the way things are progressing. I'm not exactly where I would like for it to be, because I would like for E.B. Henderson to be known as the grandfather of Black basketball and a household name.
Absolutely. And then finally, you mentioned the statue at his alma mater. In addition to his contributions in sports, Dr. Henderson was instrumental in the organization of Black people in the early 1900s. After creating the first Black Amateur Athletic Association in 1906, he organized the first rural chapter of the NAACP in Falls Church and served as the state conference president of the Virginia chapters in the 1950s. I've had the good fortune to talk to a gentleman named Itop Udo Emma. He's the founder of the Compton Magic on a number of occasions. He has talked recently about how certain things like community book drives are actually providing him with more pride than his athletic achievements. Recently, he had a guy named Oneka Okongwu get drafted to the Hawks. And the same week that they were going to have a draft party, he was in Compton giving out books, doing drives in the community. And it seemed like that was almost a greater source of pride for him than anything he was doing regarding the game of basketball. Have your grandfather, do you know if he felt his kind of organizational and his kind of advancements of African Americans in the early 1900s was equal in kind of contributions to society as his contributions to the game of basketball?
It's definitely up there. He was so active as a civil rights activist, not only here in Virginia, but also in Washington, D.C. He was the head of a group called Citizens Against Segregation in the nation's capital. And he picketed and protested against the National Theater. He also picketed and protested against the DAR and the Constitution Hall for not allowing Marian Anderson to be to sing, and was instrumental with Secretary Ickes in helping to move that forward, because he had a relationship with, and this is strictly, he met with, and in his dissertation that was written by him about him, in interviews that were taken, he says he met with Eleanor Roosevelt on many occasions. Wow. He said they would meet at the YWCA in Washington, and then when he became a member of the one of the organizations in the New Deal, that he was invited to the White House. So he, and a lot of this, he was active in at the state level, at the local level in Falls Church, and in Washington, D.C., all at the same time, mind you. I don't think he ever got him. My grandmother probably didn't see a whole lot of him. Right. And because he was just so busy. And busy is good, it seems like that's something that's in our DNA, being busy. It's a good thing. Being busy is good.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is fascinating. I mean, I did not see anything about Eleanor Roosevelt anywhere in my searchings. That's absolutely fascinating to hear. But yeah, he seemed like he lived a very rich life, and most of it was
Yes.
not only busy but in service of others.
It was all about service for others, I think. He led a life in service to others, but a lot of it was things that he chronicled and he wrote about. His writings were as important to him as anything in his life because he started out writing. He participated in a baseball game down on the mall playgrounds, and he wrote the story up and passed it on to the sports editor at the Washington Star. And from that point on, they paid him a penny a word for the stories that he wrote.
Oh wow.
And back then, like the sports pages were only like one page, though.
Yeah.
And he wrote 3,000 letters to the editor, usually about the civil rights activities, of things that were important about social justice um, in the community and in the capital and in the nation. And people used to look forward to his letters to the editor. And they used to wonder, who he was. And, there was a lot of people who actually responded to his letters to the editor. Not all favorable, mind you,
Sure.
but he didn't really care about that. And when he retired, he wrote an 8-part expose, which I think could, equal double as a memoir in the Washington Afro-American. And a lot of the information that I pulled from, a lot of information that the person that did a dissertation about him and everybody else, they look to that. And my book is a lot of him me telling the story in his own words.
Gotcha.
I thought that was important. To hear it from him, rather than from me, and so my book has like 417 citations and um, who knows how many pages of bibliography and indexing in the back. Oh, indexing is such a tedious task. Oh, I swear. But you know what? A lot of people, they don't read the whole thing. They say, oh, I'm interested in this. Now I'll go back and find, oh, it's on that page. So an index is very important. But the tedious task of doing it, boy, I tell you. But you know what? The book is probably the equivalent of a doctoral dissertation.
Gotcha.
It's very, and it's also a study in genealogy about my family as well. And the intro and the conclusion are basically about, the intro is about who is E.B. Henderson, but the epilogue, the conclusion, is about getting him into the Basketball Hall of Fame. I thought that was a good story that needed to be added.
Absolutely. And that occurred in 2013, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah, that
Mr.
happened in
Henderson,
2013, 10 years ago. And
absolutely.
10 years. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that's fascinating. I think that this is going to be a great read. It's called The Grandfather of Black Basketball, The Life and Times of Dr. E.B. Henderson. It is available for pre-order on Amazon now. It looks like it'll be available February 20th of 2024.
Yes, that's the release date, and those if you pre-order now, that's when your copies will be sent to you. And I look forward to 2024 being a very busy year. I look forward to this new chapter in my life, and basically I look forward to my grandfather getting his just due, for his contributions to um, laying the groundwork so that African Americans could participate on an equal basis in athletics here in the United States.
Absolutely. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us here today. We want everybody to go out there and continue to research Dr. E.B. Henderson, just to get his story out there, to have more awareness brought about the actions and the qualities that he was able to bring to people during his time. And yes, we thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.